Okay, hey everybody. Well, whoever's here, but anyway, as you can see, it's a very rainy day, but I'm traveling back home to Florida and thought I would stop off here in Arkansas and visit a site that I used to teach about as a teacher, and it is Little Rock Central High School, which in 1954 was a site of a very famous confrontation here in Little Rock, and it really tested the wills of both sides. But whenever the Brown versus Board of Education decision came about, lots of different school systems, they kind of did their own thing regarding the desegregation of schools, and they honestly thought here in Arkansas it wouldn't be, that much of a problem. But whenever they came up with a plan to desegregate a school here in Little Rock, it all kind of collapsed in on itself. And so I'm at the location of Central High School, and I'll do a quick tour of it and just show you around, all right? So anyway, this is actually the visitor center. It's a National Historic Site now through the National Park Service. But all along this area, all along this street here, this is where the protest would have been regarding it. And the plan was to allow 9 black students to enter Central High School during the school year 1954 and 55. And throughout that summer before the school year started, there was some discontent. You could tell there was some trouble brewing, but whenever it came time to actually begin school, there was massive protests throughout Little Rock about it. And it made headline news across the United States and also across the world. Now, a lot of people ask what this gas station is here for, and the reason why it's still here and it's been preserved is because this is one of the only places with a public or a pay telephone here in the area. And so reporters that had gathered here to witness what was going on, this was the only place that they could really call from, because back then they didn't have cell phones or anything like that. So there were reporters flooding into this gas station to try to report what they were seeing on the streets surrounding me here, and now it's peaceful. But back then, whenever they tried to start school, there was lots of people lining the streets protesting what was happening. And so these 9, they call them the Little Rock 9, the 9 African American students that came to attend the school, they soon learned that, well, they definitely weren't being welcomed. And so what ended up happening is since it made such headline news and everything, basically the Orville Faubus, he'd ordered, got to go back a little bit, but Orville Faubus is the governor of Arkansas at the time. He had ordered the National Guard here to not allow the black students to even enter the school. And so that was another thing that caused a lot of major rift, because basically he was using federal authority to prohibit federal law from actually taking place. And so he was basically ordered to get the National Guard out of here, and then he just left city police, which led to an even bigger altercation. But things got so desperate and things got so intense that I'm going across the street, hopefully not get hit. Things got so desperate and so intense that President Eisenhower had to step in, and he was like, we're not gonna, you're breaking federal law here, and you can't do that. So he said, if you're not gonna desegregate like the law says, then I'm gonna have to help out. So he ended up sending in 101st Airborne in here to allow the 9 black students to enter, and that ended up of course making headline news too. So, but this is a school here. Hopefully you can see it through all the rain. Hopefully my umbrella's not getting in the way. But the school looks almost exactly like it did in 1954 whenever this happened. And so I think they got a little memorial where those people are standing, or a plaque or something. I'll show you what that is here in a second. But when the students finally did get inside the building, there were, their little journey did not end there. I mean, they were basically tortured throughout the entire school year. They were harassed at lunch, they were harassed on the way to classes. they were called, you know, all kinds of derogatory names. And you know, as the school year progressed, though, you know, there was a little bit more acceptance. But even by the end of that school year, you know, a lot of people hadn't given up the fight. Like, there was one student, one African American student that was scheduled to graduate, and like whenever he walked across the platform to receive his degree, like nobody clapped for him, which is, you know, sad, but you know, I guess it was a sign of the times. But after that first school year, Governor Faubus, what he ended up doing was he decided he would just close all the high schools here in Little Rock. I believe there are like 4 of them. And so he ended up actually closing all 4 of the high schools the next year to halt integration. So at that point, you know, the students that were supposed to be here were kind of left to their own devices. So, you know, they had to either quit school altogether, or, you know, there were some private schools that began to spring up. But anyway, let's get a little bit closer to the school. And if you look at the old archival photographs, you'll notice that you know, the school really hasn't changed that much. So we'll kind of retrace the path they took to get inside the school. It's weird. It's almost like kind of like walking into like a postcard, because, or at least into a history book, because, you know, I studied this a long time, taught about it a long time. And it's strange to actually see it up close and personal. It's a beautiful school. So this is a sort of commemorative garden here. And so I think each of the Little Rock 9, they have a bench here. Yeah, so these are each commemorative benches. There's some students playing around up there. I don't know if they're like students here or not. Who knows? Yeah. Probably one of the most famous stories that is told, or at least the most famous picture from it, is of young Elizabeth Eckford. And the press, they took a picture of her as she arrived here in Little Rock. And you know, the other students had basically received a call of what to expect, but she didn't have a telephone, so she never got the call. So she ended up actually arriving alone on the first day of school. And so whenever she got here, she was met by a mom. And there's a famous picture taken of her and another woman whose name is Hazel Bryan. And she, you know, it's like one of those iconic photographs. You know, you got Hazel Bryan screaming at Elizabeth, and Elizabeth is just standing there with a very stoic face, just continuing to walk. And somebody took that picture, and it's the one you often see in the history books. So let's walk up the steps. What's interesting is, I think about 40 years later, Hazel and Elizabeth were reunited here. And Hazel, you know, throughout the years, she's had a change of heart about feelings of race. And so they were actually reunited here, and Hazel apologized to Elizabeth for what had happened. You know, that unfortunately they're going to be remembered for that one photograph the rest of their lives, and beyond too. But Hazel and Elizabeth actually became friends afterwards and went on speaking engagements together, but I think that relationship kind of fell apart. Unfortunately, Elizabeth just, you know, she just kind of was sort of one of the tragic members of Little Rock 9, and sort of was haunted by her experiences. So she never fully developed trust with people. I read a book about the two of them, and it told their story. Anyway, this is Central High School. And it's Sunday, so there's no way we'll be able to get in. But this is the path they would have taken to get in. It's funny, I think that when they did the 40th anniversary here. Whenever they came back for the 40th anniversary, they were welcomed on the steps by then Governor Bill Clinton. And he actually opened the door for them to enter. So 40 years before that, they were being barred from entering by every means necessary. And then 40 years after the fact, the governor and actually President of the United States at that point, sorry, he wasn't governor at that point, he welcomed them back in. I think it's the 40th anniversary if that happened, but don't quote me on that. So, continuing down the steps, and if you got questions, feel free to ask them. I'll try. I've read a lot about this incident. And what's strange, too, is I've got sort of a personal connection to it, which I don't advertise too much, but my dad used to work for Orville Faubus, who was the governor of Arkansas, and he's sort of become, oh man, I'm stepping into this, okay, I'm gonna have really wet feet on the way home now. Oh crud. Man. Okay. I don't really have a good pair of shoes left. Okay, let's see. This will probably just get me in the worst condition. But yeah, my dad used to actually work for Orville Faubus. My dad gave him his first kind of apprenticeship, and so, you know, we kind of grew up knowing the man, and didn't really know the history until I was in a high school history class, and up pops a video of Orville Faubus during the Little Rock crisis, and I'm like, oh my god, that's him. I don't know what this is. Let's see what this is. Sorry, my feet are already wet, I guess it doesn't matter. Okay, it just looks like a fake rock. So, I'll give you a last look at the high school, but this is the street where all the protests happened, where the police were basically dragging people away. People were shouting racial insults to non-black students. But it looks very similar to the way it did back then. And ooh, that poor house is going to be condemned soon, it looks like. But across the street here, actually I'll give you another view of this is your final view of the school. Compare it to the old pictures. You'll notice it hasn't changed all that much. So now along here, high school students from Central High School here throughout the years, they've put up their own sort of memorial or commemoration to the events here. Hope y'all can hear me over the rain. It's better me walking in it than driving in it because I'm not a good driver in the rain. And the fact that it gets so dark so friggin' early around here, I gotta find a place to stay because not only am I a bad driver at night, I'm also a bad driver in the rain. So combining those two, I'd be off on the side of the road somewhere. That's why I'm so glad that when I give tours, they're either walking or we're with a bus driver. Oh, I'm jaywalking. That's why I'm glad when I give tours that there is always a trusty bus driver for us. Because if I was in charge, we'd all be dead. We'd be our own little historic moment. So anyway, this is a commemorative garden, and this is put up by a lot of people, but a lot of it was also designed by the students through the years. So I'll just give you a quick overview of it. And then I'm going to go see if I can dry out a little. Even though you have an umbrella, it doesn't mean that you stay dry. Alright, so basically what you got is these two kind of entryways. I think this is just my interpretation, is they symbolize the entrance into the school. So you walk in, and you see how Central High has grown through the years. So back then, you know, you had images of people being kind of shoved out and not allowed in, but then you've got images here to show you the school through the years, you know, of integration actually happening and being successful. So I'm not going to go too far up because I'm going to go to... So that about concludes it here. I hope you enjoyed it. And you know, Little Rock, you know, it's pretty much whenever I say, hey, I'm from Arkansas, everybody always asks, are you from Little Rock? So, you know, there's a lot to do in Little Rock, but Arkansas itself has some beautiful gems too. So if you're ever traveling through Arkansas, make sure that you visit the Northwest Arkansas region, because they've got some beautiful things up there. That's actually where I grew up. And they've got I would say one of the leading art museums in all of North America, which is the Crystal Bridges Museum, which recently opened. And it was funded by one of the people of the Walmart family. And it is a phenomenal art museum if you're into that sort of thing. But there's also a beautiful place called Eureka Springs, Arkansas, which is this adorable little town in Northwest Arkansas as well. And but there's also things to do here in Little Rock. And I definitely suggest visiting the exhibit area inside here in the visitor center. And if you are a fan of old Bill Clinton, you can visit his presidential museum here, which I've never actually visited, and I don't think I'll have time to do it this trip, but you know, there's always another time. So anyway, thank you all for joining me, and I will chat with you later. Hopefully there'll be another place I'll, you know, find to stop at, because this rain's slowing me down, so I might as well just stop and do some things. So, all right, everybody, take care, and please visit me on my website at oneofmylandadventures.com, and enjoy yourself.